Hello and welcome to Everyday Tarot, your daily dive into the divine wisdom of the tarot. I'm your host, Camille A. Saunders, and today I'm talking about the usage of tarot in the TV show Dead to Me. Whether you're a seasoned tarot reader or just starting to explore, this podcast offers daily insights, intuitive messages, and practical advice drawn from the cards. Each episode is designed to help you connect with your inner wisdom, find clarity in your decisions, and tap into the energy of the universe. Tune in every day, Monday through Friday, for fresh perspectives and empowering guidance from the tarot as interpreted by me. The best way to support the podcast right now is to listen daily, rate, review, and to follow or subscribe in your chosen podcast app. The next best way is to check out my Patreon at patreon.com/everydaytarot. I have some new benefits, like if you join at the lovers level, you get the ability to ask tarot-related questions and I'll answer them on the podcast. You'll be individually thanked by name on the podcast when you join the tier. And if you join the Witch Bitch level, you get monthly tarot hangouts with me, as well as the opportunity to get an individual tarot reading live on the podcast. The link is in the show notes if you want to check out the Patreon. You can always go to my website, CamilleASaunders.com/everydaytarot, for all the latest information related to the podcast and to find images of the cards I pull. If you're local to the greater Puget Sound area, I'd love to see you at one of my Let's Talk Tarot meetup group events where we all bring some of our favorite decks and play around with tarot and oracle decks together. Our next meetup will be on March 10th at 5 p.m. at Township 20 in Sumner. You can use the meetup link to check out details on upcoming events. All right, so we're into season 4 of the podcast. In the first season, I introduced tarot through talking about oracle versus tarot cards, myths of tarot, how to find a deck, reading for yourself versus others, and much more. In season 2 and 3, I went through the major arcana and the 4 suits, one per episode. And this season, I'm talking all about tarot in pop culture. And today, I'm talking about the usage of tarot in the TV show Dead to Me. So if you don't know about this show, a little background on it. Dead to Me is an American black comedy drama television series that has Christina Applegate and Linda Cardellini as two grieving women who bond during group therapy. In the series, Judy, who's Linda, and Jen, who's Christina Applegate, become friends after Judy accidentally, I guess before I say this, we're going to get into spoilers for the episode and probably for the whole show, because this episode that the tarot takes place in is really close to the end of the show in season 3. So you've had your spoiler warning. If you haven't watched the show and you want to do it, I'm about to spoil it. So pause this, go watch, and come back. It is on Netflix, I believe, at this time. But anyway, so not everyone is aware of it at the time, but the two women become friends after one of them basically kills the other person's husband in a hit and run. And it takes a while for them to kind of figure out that that's what's happening. And the two women have already sort of gotten really close by that point, and they go on adventures together. And their lives sort of get interwoven because of sort of what happens at the beginning of the show. So, the scene I'm going to be talking about specifically is in season 3, episode 4, and season 3 is the last season of the show. I think the show ended in 2022, if I remember correctly. And what happens is Judy, one of our main characters, and Michelle, another character in the show that we've seen over a couple of seasons, they go on the quote-unquote perfect date that involves tarot and making out. So they've dated previously in the show, things happened, they're sort of getting back together, they ran into each other recently, and they're going on a date again. And the scene just really starts out with us I think it's at Michelle's house, and they're cozy, they're at a little table, and we see the 3 tarot cards get pulled. So they don't say what if this is a tarot spread, if she's doing a past, present, future spread, which is a very common 3-card tarot draw. We can tell it's 3 cards. We know that the first card is the Death card. And so I guess let me back up before that. So the scene starts out by one of them saying, "Let's see what the future holds." And it's at her house. She's reading for Judy. And Judy is kind of freaked out by the cards. I don't think she is at that point. I think she's very into whatever Michelle is into, but then Michelle starts pulling cards, and the first card she pulls is death. And I'm pretty sure it's upright. We barely see the cards in the scene. I'm gonna have to make some inferences about the other two cards that get pulled, just based off of the imagery they talk about. But sort of immediately, Judy is kind of freaked out by the death card. She's like, "Oh, that's a lot." And Michelle kind of goes like, "Oh no, the death card, it's not literal. It's more like big life change." So I would say like that's a good right. She's reframing it for her. She's sort of letting her know like, "Don't worry, it's not about like literal death." But of course, if we kind of like zoom out in this TV show, the TV show is called Dead to Me, and it starts with murder, or at least accidental vehicular manslaughter. um, and so it is kind of this like maybe meta commentary on like Michelle's really maybe interpreting this as like, oh no, there's like more literal death or a Judy in my life. Because she is kind of the one gets involved early on with um, she's the one that kills John's husband in the beginning. So, and she's like a very nice, like forgiving person. It is accidental, seemingly, but this is sort of what kicks off the whole show. And so they have this conversation about the card. They even say sort of what it looks like normally. She's like, oh, like sort of like trying to make light of it, of like, oh, like does the Grim Reaper with like the scythe and like the thing in his hand like freak you out? And they're like, haha, like a little bit. She's kind of like nervous laughing, I think. And then we don't really see, there's just like barely a glimpse of the other two cards. It looks like a pretty standard like Rider-Waite-Smith deck. Um, just from the imagery they talk about and like the brief glimpses of the card. Although I guess we see the back and they're not like the traditional back of the cards. Um, the back of the cards, they look kind of like tan. They have like a rectangle around like it's a border, and then they have like almost like a mandala looking like circular image in the middle of the card. And these are like the back. So like all of these, this is the back of the deck of cards that look the same. And then the deck itself, or the box, we can kind of see it. It says tarot. It looks like it has another word in front of it, but it's quite hard to see, and I don't recognize the deck itself. It's also interesting because we get this like overhead image of the tarot cards, but we also see they're drinking like vodka, I think, or out of plastic cups with cute little straws. And yeah, there's like some, I don't know. It's like they had salads or something as their date. Like I feel like I see some like dressing or something. And then they have a candle. So they just had dinner, they're setting the scene, they're hanging out. Yeah, okay. So let's get back into it. So she pulls death. They're sort of like, oh, okay, let's see. And then it goes on to say, like, oh, so Judy goes along to say something like, "Oh, that's a lot of knives." So I guess she's talking about a swords card. Again, we don't quite see it. I kind of wonder if it's like the 10 of swords. If she's saying it's a lot, like one of the probably the higher up ones with a large amount of swords on it. And then there's another card flipped kind of right immediately, and she goes like, "Oh, a noose." Um, and so, again, like my guess would be that that is the Hanged Man or the Hanged One card. But we don't see that. We just get like a brief glimpse. And again, like I don't recognize the deck. And I scoured online and I couldn't find anyone talking about the specific deck or the specific cards that were pulled other than the death card. Because they don't name the other cards like in the scene. They just say like, oh, that's a lot of sword or like knives. And then like, oh, there's a noose. And then Michelle kind of reflects to Judy, who she's reading for, like, wow, you got like a lot of shit going on right now. And Judy just sort of like pauses and then is like, oh yeah, that's an accurate deck. Um, and then they sort of have a moment and Michelle says, like, do you want to talk about it? And Judy, who, if you've watched this show, likes to kind of deflect or not make things about her. She's always focusing on what other people need and trying to make them happy and trying to get them the stuff they need and want and like trying to make good about the situation. She's pretty positive, sometimes maybe in a perhaps like spiritually bypassing or like toxic positivity way, where when actual things are going really horribly in her life or she's having a hard time, like she doesn't always, like she just kind of like avoids or ignores it or just kind of focuses on other people. And so her saying, no, I want to drink about it, doesn't shock me. They kind of go on for a little bit and then, sort of, so Michelle had asked, Judy, like, oh, do you want to talk about this? And then Michelle says, she's the one that's pulling the card. She goes on to say, like, oh, I think that card is meant for me anyway. The restaurant closed last week. So I assume she's talking about the death card. Again, like a big life change. She goes on to talk about that this restaurant she was working at closed. I think she's a chef. I haven't watched the show in a while, and I hadn't watched the whole episode. I found a clip of it. But she talks about like, oh, this restaurant closed, like it's been terrible, like everything's going to shit. And then she says, oh, actually I got this opportunity to like go to Sonoma, like another town, and go open my own restaurant there. So Judy is so excited to have like this thing to glom onto, to not have to talk about her cards or her life anymore, and to kind of be like, oh, okay, like tell me more about that. Like that's a really cool idea and good thing. Yeah, and so I guess like sort of with the context of this, like in this season, like again, death has sort of been like literally like throughout the whole show. It starts with this like murder and or again vehicular manslaughter, and like you don't really know. We sort of see what happened, but you don't know. Like the characters don't know like how they're all interwoven for a little bit, and then they basically get to know each other, and then later find out that like one was the perpetrator of the accident and one was involved because it was her husband that died. And anyway, they sort of end up again bonding in like group therapy and like a grief group, a support group, there. And yeah, so there is this like theme of death weaving throughout the show. But at the beginning of this season, and part of why I think Judy's talking about like, oh man, the death card, like she's really kind of triggered by that. The hanged man card, right? Like, which would be about perspective change or trying to see, I mean, maybe for her, trying to see things in like maybe to be real and see things in like a real light instead of just trying to change everything into like toxic positivity, which is a little bit of what she does as a character. And also like, but yeah, and she learns basically that she, again, spoilers, but that she has like a cancer diagnosis. And so she's sort of like, I don't, like, again, when we think about this like life change that Michelle's perhaps going to have when she says, oh, maybe this card's about me, like my life change, the restaurant, like, oh, like this tumultuous time in my life, but actually maybe things are going to turn out good. Like maybe I'll move away and go to this new restaurant and like really throw my life into that or throw myself into that and get really excited. And Judy just kind of like wants to go along for the ride. She's like, great, like, oh yeah, you should do that. And like, she really wants to like have something positive to kind of latch onto. Cause again, like she's facing a pretty bad diagnosis. And so, and she ends up dying, I think, at the end of the season. And so, she is sort of throughout this whole season, like this final season, like reckoning with the fact that she sort of did avoid or put things off for a long time, and focused on other people, and that sort of allowed this diagnosis to go under the radar for a bit. And now she's actually like it's progressing, the cancer's progressing in stages, and so she's actually going to have to like face it, and actually going to have to start like perhaps telling people about it or coming to terms with it. And so that's also just sort of interesting context as we think about this, because also, right, like the death card for her is like, this is a big life change. Like in a lot of ways, this is going to sort of force her to think about like, this is going to change a lot of things, and maybe not so much in the positive way that she was hoping for. But yeah, let's look into one of my favorite books to look at, Fearless Tarot by Elliot Adam, about how to give a positive reading in any situation. And let's look at Death, the Ten of Swords, and the Hanged Man, and kind of see if there's anything else that we can like glean from this scene, or sort of like meanings or lessons learned that get portrayed in the show. Again, so I talked about death a bit, but let's get into it just a little bit more. And I open it and look at the first page on death in this book. It says, accepting inevitable change. So that is a bit of what's happening with Judy right now. She's having to accept the inevitable change in her life that she can no longer ignore. This card's about change and transformation. Many people are afraid to sit at a tarot reader's table because of the dreaded death card. So the show does kind of fall into that trope of oh, okay, we got tarot going on, oh, it's going to foretell horrible things, and it's going to have really intense cards, which it does seemingly. Again, we don't even get what the other two cards are, but we can kind of infer that one of them is one of the higher up swords cards, and then we also have probably the Hanged Man if she's talking about a noose. And so this card's all about important changes that you're undergoing. It's not always a welcome card, and sometimes it's shocking to experience, and it can outwardly appear frightening, but also it can be this moment of a phoenix rising from the ashes. Do you struggle with accepting change? Does the fear of death keep you from living your life? What old, unneeded part of yourself are you resistant to letting go of, even though you know releasing that part would set you free? And death on the card often appears on top of a white horse, heralding an end to old ways. So almost like the person that would walk through a medieval town and be okay, here's what's going on, here's your news, everyone. And so it's this herald of the change kind of idea, and that no one is immune from death's power, right? That is the one thing we all have in common as humans, that we are all going to die. Everything that lives must die, and everything must change. And so this is sort of, again, we're so confronted with that fact in the same way that Judy is. And Michelle, right, also kind of takes this on as well and says that oh, okay, right, maybe this card's also meant for me, which I like seeing that, because that's a thing that sometimes comes up for me as a tarot reader when I'm reading for other folks, is sometimes pulling cards, it can be a little hard to know if there's other people around, or if you usually pull cards for yourself and you're pulling for someone else, but you're still there. Sometimes I have pulled cards that I think are for other people, and maybe not the person that I was reading the cards for, especially if there's a lot of people around, and especially if people's lives are interwoven in the way that they are in the show as well. So that's just kind of interesting as well. So I guess in the meanings, lessons learned part, we learn that death is not necessarily about literal death. We get this sort of reflection that while it looks like a scary card, right, maybe that's not what we have to totally take away from it. Michelle, as a tarot reader, kind of voices wow, you got a lot going on right now. If this is what your life is, ooh, these cards are really an indication of a lot's going on for you. And we sort of don't get to see in this scene what that is, because Judy doesn't really want to talk about it. She wants to drink about it, as she says. And she sort of just throws herself into this relationship. They end up making out later, and I think she spends the night there. And so she's just sort of in this avoidance, oh, okay, this is great. I'm in my little bubble. I enjoy it here. I don't really want to think about real life about it. And she again kind of gloms onto what Michelle, is talking about, or what's going on in her life. All right, so that's sort of about the death card there. Let's get into the Ten of Swords. And again, I am inferring this because we don't know what card was pulled there. It's hard for me to tell. It could be one of the first swords cards, right? We don't really know her perception of how many daggers is a lot, or how many knives is a lot. I think she says knives. It could be, right, 3 or 4. It could be 10. But the Ten of Swords is another card that often when it gets pulled, it's kind of dramatic card. Like, it's usually like a person that's been stabbed in the back 10 times with swords, which is, right, sort of like literally overkill. So when we look in the Fearless Tarot book about this card, it talks about that the Ten of Swords is about facing the source of your anxiety, which again sounds a lot like what's going on for Judy in this episode, or sort of maybe the cards are telling her like, hey, like, yeah, right, like maybe it's time. Maybe it's finally time to start thinking about how to prepare for your death, right? Essentially, as she goes forward with her diagnosis and kind of learns that there's not a lot that she can do. Um, and so, this card's often depicted as someone like face down. The swords are in their back. Whatever, maybe took them down was chasing them from behind, so they were running away. And the swords in the back symbolize the irrational fears, and the fears sort of finally caught up to them. But you also can see that sort of in this last moment, right? Maybe this person again, as we're thinking about sort of like the symbol or what this card means, that maybe they finally learned to surrender their fears in this moment, right? Maybe they finally stopped running and sort of allowed it to happen. The Ten of Swords represents challenging rites of passages that you may not have chosen, whereas the Hierophant is about rites of passage, but it's more about like ones that you do choose, right? About makes me think about, just since the Hierophant is sort of like a religious figure, like baptisms or catechisms or sort of like religious ceremonies that I'm aware of that like people go through in like adolescence, where it's like usually that's something you've chosen, or even if you think about like getting married in a church or any sort of like, commitment, like that you're sort of having this rite of passage. But in the sense, like the Ten of Swords is much more about like, it's a challenging one. It's not one that you chose for yourself, which again, if we think about how the show's going, like a cancer diagnosis, not one that you chose for yourself. I suspect she does a lot of meaning making around it because she feels very guilty for what she did. It's probably part of why she doesn't really want to face this, or like really be in touch with her body, or really be kind of taking care, or like getting regular medical checks, because she is sort of focusing on what her actions have done to other people and trying to kind of make amends in that way, instead of sort of sitting with her own things that have happened, her own choices, responsibilities, and sort of seeing like, what does that actually mean? So sort of some of the things they ask in this book for this card are about, what fears are you constantly trying to keep ahead of? Is your day filled with thoughts of terrible things that might happen? Do you try to just keep busy so you don't have to face the source of your unease? Ignoring fear is the same as running from it. It's still there, lurking about as usual. Often the thing we fear, horrible illnesses, death, poverty, loss, is a distraction from going deeper and listening to our inner self. Spirit does not want suffering for you, but the only way to be free from needless suffering is to surrender. And it's not that you're surrendering to fear, you're surrendering the fear. Surrender to feeling the fear and then let it go. And that is sort of the journey that Judy goes on for, in part of the rest of the season, is actually starting to face some of these things that are going on with her and figuring out like, okay, like I can't, right, like I can't actually change how things are going to go. So how do I embrace the time I do have left? How do I, and I think that is sort of what she's like thinking about in this moment. It's like, oh, I'm going to embrace the time I have left by hanging out with this girl I like, and just sort of, right, like having a fun night. Yeah. And being with this person that she really, I mean, I don't know at this point if she's using the word love, but I think like she really, really cares about her. They were in a relationship before, and she basically only dumped her because there was uh, like a different sort. They were interwoven in a different way. There was like a conflict, and that they didn't want, like, she didn't want her to find out about it or to like be around her, and she was sort of like pressured into breaking up with her. So it's not really like she lost feelings for her. She sort of broke up with her because of other circumstances at the time. All right, and then let's get into the last one, which again, I assume is the Hanged Man. I'm not quite sure what other, again, usually the Hanged Man is not hung with a noose around the neck like we often thinking of with hanging, but usually the sort of noose is around like their foot, or they're sort of suspended upside down from a tree or branch, or sort of pole. And the Hanged Man is all about sort of the sacrifice for the greater good. Again, I'm reading from the Fearless Tarot book by Elliot Adam. The Hanged Man's about a temporary sacrifice. This could be sacrificing time, energy, comfort, resources, old habits, or an outdated attitude. For success to be achieved, a sacrifice is often required. By pooling your best energies and resources into your goal, you will ensure it manifests. What changes would you like to see in your life? Do you have a goal that requires a lot of work? Is making a sacrifice scary for you because it means that everything will change? The Hanged Man is suspended from the branches of the tree of wisdom. They are seeking to improve themselves. By hanging upside down, they are gaining a new perspective and a look at the world from a different vantage point. All the blood rushes to the head. Again, imagine you're upside down hanging by your foot. All of their energies being pooled into their mind. They are temporarily sacrificing the use of their arms and legs. This represents sacrificing the desire to walk away. The Hanged Man is suspending his normal routines to focus his energy. His face is calm. Although he is not comfortable, he is not suffering. He knows that sacrificing his usual stance of keeping his feet firmly on the ground will free his mind to new solutions. The Hanged Man is looking ahead. The position of the one leg crossed behind the other mirrors the final card in the major arcana, the World. The World represents completion and attainment. The Hanged Man symbolizes temporarily enduring discomfort to ensure the achievement of your greatest goals. And again, thinking about this in context of the show, so if we think about this as perhaps a past, present, future spread, which again, I am inferring, I don't know, they don't say it, but often that is what you do with a 3-card spread. So if the past was death, right, which is kind of how the show started with a death, a literal death, but also just a very big transformation of both Judy and Jen's lives. And then if the present is more of the 10 of Swords of this, like, okay, maybe I'm finally at that point of like, I can't keep running from what's going on. Again, like perhaps cancer diagnosis. And then if the Hanged Man is the future, there is this aspect of like Judy sort of planning for her own death and kind of how she wants to live the rest of her time, maybe what sacrifices she wants to make, the people that she wants to still spend time with, and that she can kind of let go of some of the other things that maybe she focused on the past. Maybe she can finally be a little more vulnerable about herself and what's going on. I think she does later in this episode, actually. Her and Michelle, she thinks Michelle is asleep, and she sort of does confess to her that, oh, I have a cancer diagnosis. And she sort of at the time like doesn't think Michelle is awake. But we find out in a couple episodes from now, Michelle did hear that. And so it does sort of like come to a head, or like they do have a bit of like a confrontation about it, but just more in a way where it sounds like Judy really, she does want to like do things differently. She does want to like actually perhaps think about like, how do I plan for this? She doesn't want to tell other people in her life, I think because she's afraid of burdening them, or she thinks she's going to make it all about her. But with Michelle, as Michelle's sort of sharing and being vulnerable about her own life, Judy does feel this like, oh, this pull of like, I want to tell her what's going on, but it feels really hard. And I don't want her to just like pity me, right? I don't want her to then make it all about me, which is like what we as humans often do when someone tells us something about a death or a diagnosis or their suffering, is that sometimes that makes us really uncomfortable, and that discomfort sometimes gets projected out in unsavory ways, I would say. And so when we think about this, the hanged man, like maybe Judy and her future is getting to a place of like, okay, like, all right, this life is not going the way I thought it would. Like I thought maybe I would get in trouble for this murder that I committed, but they sort of have gotten away with it at this point. And so now it's a bit more about like, okay, like my life again, I sort of am free from the thing I thought that was going to happen to me, but now I have this other thing going on that I am not at all free from and that I don't really have any control over, and that I'm just a bit at the mercy of like this piece of surrender. And so I think that is kind of where we're going to end this. So as we think about, yeah, let's dive in and see what the cards have to say on this topic. All right, so I am pulling from the Desert Illuminations Tarot Codex by Lindsay D. Williams. And hilariously, I pulled the Knight of Chilies, which is the same card I pulled on my last episode. I went and looked just to make sure and was like, yep, that's the same one. And as I was pulling this card, I was thinking about like, how can we do surrender in our own lives? What do we need to surrender around? And just that theme, since that's sort of where I ended the discussion. So I'll read the Knight of Chilies again, and I guess this card's very important to us right now, and the collective wants us to pay attention. So, or the universe wants us as the collective to really embody this card. So again, the Knight of Chilies. Chilies are the equivalent of wands in this deck. So a warrior woman fiercely rides a buffalo through the desert. She is harnessing all the fire and energy from the bundle of chilies she holds up. Her clothing is decorated with embroidered lizards representing high energy and passion. When the Knight of Chilies appears in a reading, it is letting you know that you are completely gassed up and ready to go. You are filled with the drive of all the fire and energy in this card, allowing you to go forth with your plans quickly. Your vision is as clear as the cloudless desert sky. Embrace this energy and go forth. You can use this energy to bring about massive expansion in your life. This card's energy can become overwhelming. Be careful not to be too impulsive in your decision making. If you act first instead of thinking, you could wind up regretting your hasty decisions. All right, and I'm going to pull out the Fearless Tarot book again since this card came up again. I'm curious what it says in here about the card. So again, the equivalent would be the Knight of Wands. So I'm going to find that in my book. And again, this is the Fearless Tarot book by Elliot Adam. All right. The Knight of Wands. The Knight of Wands is all about adventure, freedom, exploration. They are the traveler of the tarot. They said in this card, he's pictured here visiting Egypt. He understands that by removing himself from the humdrum routines of day-to-day life, he can gain a wider perspective on who he really is. When is the last time you halted routine and explored outside your home or work? Do you need a spontaneous vacation or a small getaway to regain perspective? Do you go to the same old restaurants and walk the same old streets every day in your community? The Knight of Wands is a bold figure. His little brother, the Page of Wands, has a small red plume in his cap, representing the spark of adventure that accompanies new beginnings. The Knight's blazing red plume is full. His horse rears up with uncontained energy and excitement, just like the buffalo in this card. His passions spur him onward toward new lands. The Knight of Wands doesn't sit around and think, he acts. He urges you to get out of your routines and to expose yourself to something new. The world is wide open and waiting for you to experience it. This card is long associated with travel. Travel broadens the mind and it frees us from the monotony and allows us to explore environments where people don't know our personal history. By exploring new places, you are on a journey of discovering yourself. When you return from a trip, your mind looks at the life you left behind with renewed clarity. It's called leaving the bubble. So I think that's a good place to end for today. So it sounds like we have adventure on the horizon. And if you don't, maybe it's time to find some and to get out of your day to day routine, as this card's calling us to do, and to go boldly forth. And again, apparently really boldly, because yesterday we had the same card. So we still need the message. It's coming through clearly. All right. Well, thanks for listening and joining today on Everyday Tarot. Links for the tarot decks I use will always be in the show notes and on my website if you'd like to look at them or purchase them. And like I said, thanks for joining me today on Everyday Tarot. Just as a reminder, the podcast comes out daily, Monday through Friday for all of 2025. All right. See you soon. Bye-bye.